Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. We're excited you've joined us for today's session on It's Time to Pay Attention to Gen X and Millennials. I've got a few housekeeping details before we get started. This session is being recorded, and you should receive a link to the recording tomorrow by email. Please feel free to share this webinar content with colleagues that could not attend today. A question and answer session will immediately follow the presentation. If you have a question for our speaker, please type it into the Q&A panel on your screen. This webinar is being hosted and sponsored by Suttle-Straus. If you don't know Suttle-Straus, we were founded in 1910, and over the past 116 years, our company has built up the equipment and expertise to handle almost any marketing project. We offer creative design, conventional and digital printing, displays and signage, direct mail, online marketing portals, kitting and fulfillment, and promotional products and apparel. For more information about us, please visit us on the web at Suttle-Straus.com. Our speaker today is Beth Hatcher from Beth Interactive. Beth, I'm going to hand it over to you, and you can take it away from here.
Thanks so much, Megan. And thanks to everybody who's joining us this morning from boats and islands. It's been just as rainy here in Chicago as it has been in Wisconsin. So I'm grateful to be here with you this morning to talk about generational giving, which is one of my favorite topics to talk about. Just a brief introduction. My name is Beth Hatcher. I'm the principal and CEO of Beth Interactive. We're a digital-first philanthropy and communications agency based in Chicago, but spanning across the country. And we've been very proud to partner with Suttle-Straus over the past couple of years on some really exceptional projects and client work together. Beth Interactive, we're about a 20-person team. We've been around for almost 16 years. You can see some of the things that I love here: travel, languages, specialty cocktails, probably a little bit too much, my daughters, and generational giving. I think as we are exploring work in the nonprofit space, whether you're here with us from healthcare, religion, higher education, or any other kind of nonprofit, this is really a high-level topic that we need to be thinking about. So I'm grateful that you're taking the time to think about it with us today. And as we get deeper into our agenda, I will be very happy to answer any questions that you have. So here's what we have on the docket for the next hour or so. I have 3 poll questions, so I'd like to get an understanding from folks who are on the call where you're at, both in terms of your generation and your preparedness for generational giving. So I'll stop sharing my screen in a moment and Megan can get those poll questions up. But then we'll dig into some generational giving trends, the latest research about how these generations are giving across a wide array of nonprofits. We'll define Gen X and Millennials specifically. We'll show how, we'll ask a little bit about how prepared you are, prepare on how to engage Gen X and Millennials, and then finally have a reading list and a Q&A. So I think, did my screen stop sharing suddenly, Megan?
Yeah, I don't see it right now.
Oh, okay. Let me come back. I'm not quite sure what happened. I will just pull this poll question up and then I will stop sharing so that Megan can allow you to answer the poll. But our first question is basically, which generation are you in? And I wanted to take a moment just to share the clear definitions that are widely accepted about each generation so you can figure out which generation you are in, and then I will stop sharing so you can answer the poll question. So our boomers are born between 46 and 64, Gen X born between 1965 and 1980, Millennials between 1981 and 1996, and Gen X born between 1997 and 2012. So those are the definitions, and I'm going to stop sharing so that folks can answer the poll question here. Hopefully everyone can see it on the screen.
Yeah, so choose your generation. I'm always torn as a millennial born in 1982. I always feel more like a Gen Xer than a millennial. So they have that kind of little hybrid in those years they call the Xennials, but I guess I'm a millennial according to your year chart. So, all right, it looks like we've got a mix of 50% millennials here and 50% Gen X.
Excellent. Good. Well, we're talking to the right generations. Megan, if you want to go to the next poll question, The next question is really around which industry are you in? Just so we have an understanding of whether you tend to be in the religious space, education, that can be independent schools or higher education, healthcare, or another nonprofit. We only had 4 choices, so we had to clump those together a little bit.
Yeah, so if you're in the arts or animals, you can be in the other category. We've got votes coming in here. Just click your industry on the poll question on your screen, and then we'll show it. All right, looks like we've got a good mix here. 3rd religion, 3rd other, and then a couple in education and healthcare.
Great. Excellent. So if we can go then to the last question, the last poll question that we have, Megan. The question basically is, how prepared do you feel that your organization is for these next generations of donors? Do you feel very prepared? We're on it. Do you feel somewhat prepared? You're starting to dig into it. Do you feel not very prepared? You're starting, but you're not quite sure where to go. Or do you feel not prepared at all? And that is the last question. We'd just love to get a gauge of where you're at in preparedness.
Yeah, nobody can see your individual answers. So if you're not prepared at all, that's fine. Let's get your
Absolutely. That's why we're here.
All right, we're getting our votes in. I see them tallying up. And we'll share here. Got 40% not prepared at all, 20 not very, and 40 somewhat. Nobody's very prepared. So,
which is about what we're seeing across the industry. So this is really helpful. And I'm grateful that all of you at all levels of preparedness are here to talk about generational giving trends. And my hope is that this is really a strong education and baseline in terms of who these folks are, how the giving is changing across the philanthropic landscape, why this is so important to be paying attention to now and not in a few years from now, and start to understand the best ways to engage these younger generations. So we are here to talk about all the right things. So thank you for the poll questions and for your support there, Megan. All right, so I'd love to start with just describing the current nonprofit generational landscape. As we look at the US right now, the average US donor is 64 years old. And as I'm sure you all have seen and are experiencing, donor counts are declining nationwide, as is retention. It is increasingly more and more difficult to get your donors and keep them. Now, couple that with the great wealth transfer that's anticipated to happen over the next 20 years. So you may have heard of the great wealth transfer. This is an estimated $84 trillion, trillion with a T, that is anticipated to be passed down from baby boomers and seniors down to their heirs. So that's Gen X, Millennials, and Gen Z. And you can see how the breakdown ultimately is going to happen across these different generations, Gen X and Millennials getting the lion's share and Gen Z getting an estimated 11 trillion. Now, this is further broken down into what's anticipated to go to the heirs, which is $72 trillion, with another $12 trillion anticipated from boomers and seniors going to charity. So as we think about the work in the nonprofit space, certainly we want to take advantage of that $12 trillion in the best way for our institutions. But how do we begin engaging now with these younger generations that are going to come into a huge windfall of wealth? We want to ensure that that charitable giving and philosophy is top of mind for them, and that your institution is top of mind for them as well. So this really begs the question in my mind, what is philanthropy going to look like in 20 years? When your average donor is now 84, when everyone on this call, is 20 years older, when some of us have retired and our children are now in the workforce, what is the future philanthropy going to look like? And fundamentally, it is changing in a fairly substantial way. So I'd love to share some research that I found, and everything is sourced and cited here. And there's a big reading digest at the end as well. So there's lots more information if you want to dig in further. But a few things rise to the occasion. First of all, across the board, younger generations fundamentally have fewer donors. So if you look at this chart here, this kind of yellowish green line is giving in 2012. So this is just 14 years ago. And the giving in 2023, which you see has kind of fundamentally stabilized and declined in terms of number of donors from 56% of the population to 54% of the population. But when we look at the decline and how it really changes by generation, you see that far fewer seniors are giving, even in that 9-year time frame. Slightly fewer boomers are giving, about the same number of Gen X are giving, and more millennials are giving, which is a good sign. But what does make me a little bit nervous is the number of millennials giving is nowhere close to the number of seniors who used to be giving. So fundamentally, fewer generations or younger generations have fewer donors that are giving year over year. Now, another trend, and this is a resource from the Lilly School of Philanthropy, looks at giving incidence rates by life stage. Effectively, at each stage of generations' lives, how many of them are giving? And so I think what we're seeing here is that younger generations are giving later in life, but also in smaller numbers than earlier generations have. So, for example, in 2003, donors in their prime giving years, in their 50s and 70s, gave at about 80%. Right now, these are boomers, about 60% of them are giving. And you can see how it just kind of works its way down the chart. Fewer emerging adults, so these are our Gen Z, are giving compared to their counterparts, far fewer millennials, fewer Gen X, and then, of course, fewer boomers. So we're just fundamentally seeing a kind of less philanthropic shift in terms of these younger generations, due to a number of good reasons. Some of that is debt, medical debt, education or institutional debt, and some of it is just the change in the ways in which organizations are or are not engaging with their donors. So we'll break that down a little bit more. So in terms of generational giving trends, I did want to look at a few specific industries, some of which are being represented on this call, to look at the incidence of giving by, let's start with religion. So again, this is from the Lilly School of Philanthropy, and this came out in January of 2025, so it's fairly recent, but it shows the giving incidence to religion by generation from 2003 to 2021, so an 18-year time span. And I think a few things really strike me. One is this sort of gradual decline, a slight but gradual decline for every generation in terms of their giving to religion, but also a breakdown of by 2021, the percentage of each generation who typically give to religion. And so you can see seniors are now 54%, which is down from its high 20 years ago. Boomers are almost half of that. Gen X are definitively giving at half the level seniors are. Millennials and Gen Z are both at 14%. So fundamentally in the religious institution, we are having far fewer donors give, and it just is kind of decreasing and declining with each generation. Now, the good news for religion is this pretty substantial uptick in Gen Z. I was kind of surprised, frankly, to see that Gen Zs right now are giving about at the same rate as millennials are. So I think it will be interesting as that generation starts to age, does that giving incidence increase or does it stabilize? Moving into basic needs. So some of you may focus on other nonprofits. So this is basic needs, food, housing, stability. Again, we're seeing some kind of consistent trends. Your seniors are giving at about the same rate as our Gen X, but baby boomers are giving less. Millennials and Gen Z are giving more, but again, not at the level of basic needs giving as your older generations. This is also replicated with education. Baby boomers in particular are giving substantially less to education. You see a bit of an uptick in our seniors, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Zs. But again, boomers tend to give to education and seniors out of a sense of loyalty and obligation. That is not shared by millennials and Gen X and Gen Z, who are coming out of higher education with tremendous debt in a very different relationship with their institution than older generations. So we're definitely seeing that shift, and again, that sort of steep downward decline in terms of giving incidence across the board. And not to keep hammering on it, but healthcare is kind of in a similar situation as well. Now, this research is from Blackbaud that was done actually in 2019, so this is a little bit older. And one sneak peek is if any of you who are in the healthcare institution are connected with AHP, I'll talk about some emerging research that we're doing in this space right now to get something a little bit more up to date than the 2019 study. But essentially, as we look at healthcare generational giving, the comparison here is between whether these generations give more or less to healthcare than other industries. So matures are about equal. Boomers tend to actually give more to healthcare than other institutions, likely because they are the biggest receivers of healthcare. But of course, millennials and Gen Z are certainly not giving to healthcare in the same way that they have. So all of this is to say that things are fundamentally changing. We know this to be true. You are experiencing it day to day. But why is it so important to engage with younger generations now rather than waiting for them to get 20 years older? And that's why I really love to look at this specific survey results about mid-level donor engagement. This was a great study done by the Chronicle of Philanthropy, looking at donors who right now are mid-level donors, meaning at this moment they are giving between $1,000 and $10,000 to an institution. So the question was, okay, you're a mid-level donor now, but when did you first become involved with that institution that you now are giving $1,000 to $10,000 annually to? And this is what I think is fascinating. You can see that largest bar are folks in their young adulthood. 42% of people started engaging with that institution when they were in their 20s and 30s. Those are your millennials and Gen Z right now. So I see this as an opportunity to begin building those relationships, begin fostering that engagement, whether that's through volunteerism, lower level giving, or any kind of engagement opportunity. Because as you build those bridges over years, those will become your mid-level and major donors. But it starts now, and it's really critical for the future, especially as there's going to be even more energy and attention and competition for those younger levels of donors. So let's look at who, in fact, Gen X and Millennials are. Now, I do want to mention we are specifically focusing here on Gen X and Millennials and not Gen Z. We'll talk a little bit about some general trends that support that group specifically, but some of their giving patterns are still emerging. So the focus, as you saw in the title, is really on Gen X and Millennials. I really like this visual because I think it helps to counteract a bit of a misperception that these are younger generations. I am an elder millennial. I was born in 1983, so I'm definitely on the older side, but I'm 43. I just turned 43. So we're the Taylor Swifts here, right? We are no longer these young, ungrateful donors that don't really know what we're doing in life. We are established in our careers. We have children, we have houses. We're in a much different situation than I think this perception that millennials are these young, up-and-coming generation. That's more the Greta Thunbergs, if you will. So folks who are now in their young 20s, they're really emerging into the space. But thinking about Gen X, the Elons in this space, they're actually on the verge of retirement or getting close to it. And then baby boomers, obviously, the Oprahs are a little bit more well-established. So I like to look at this just to give a visual representation of who are we actually talking about when we're talking about these generations, because they're no longer young up-and-comers. They're really here, really now, and really giving. So let's look at a breakdown of Gen X and Millennials. And this research is as of a few years ago. Starting with Gen X. As mentioned, Gen X are widely defined as being born between 1965 and 1980. So that means that this year they are turning 46 to 61. So the older Gen Xers are half a dozen years away from retirement, 4 or 5 years away from retirement. So a very different giving space than you might ordinarily think. Across the US, they represent 40 million donors. As of a few years ago, their giving patterns were clocked as an average annual gift of $730, so just under what you might consider a mid-level threshold. And typically they support 4 charities annually. When you look at the causes they're most likely to support, you can see a lot of kind of not necessarily basic needs, but human and animal welfare and services, environmental conservation, ways to really engage with the world around them. What I don't see on this list is higher education or healthcare. So human services, animal welfare, environmental and wildlife missions. And that's fairly quickly replicated by millennials as well. Millennials, by comparison, that younger generation born between 1981 and 1996. This year, millennials are turning between the ages of 30 and 45. There's slightly fewer donors for millennials, even though they represent a larger generation. And I think that's some of the decline that we've been seeing. Their average annual gift, about $500, so still fairly substantial. They tend to support 3 charities annually, but I think it's also important to think about things that might not be able to be easily tracked, such as crowdfunding. If I have a friend who has medical bills or a house fire and I'm kicking in $50 or $100, that doesn't necessarily count in those three charities. So I think there also is a shift in terms of the way in which millennials and Gen Z in particular are giving. It tends to be through smaller, one-off, less easy to track gifts than giving to a typical institution in the way that you would think of historically. Again, looking at most likely causes to support, I see a lot of consistency between these two generations: human services, animal welfare, community development, really that close, careful investment in their community. So what did not come to light here? Again, religion, higher education, healthcare. Now, those patterns may change as they get older, but I do think it's important to see where their current these generations' thought process and engagement really lies at the moment. Let's do a little bit deeper of a breakdown into each of these generations to start to understand what makes them tick. So Gen X is widely defined as being pragmatic, independent, with a deep sense of social responsibility. I think this group is also kind of skeptical, to be honest. They're a little skeptical of the world around them. And part of that is why they value transparency so deeply and research organizations before donating. So if you think about this group, they really were in the workforce when the internet came into light in a very substantial way. So technology has changed a lot over the course of their lifetimes. And I think there's just a little bit of skepticism or distance in terms of how they engage with organizations. So that's why seeing impact and having Gen X specifically know that their motivations are making a tangible difference is absolutely critical with this group. In fact, 25% of Gen Xers have said that if you do not really steward them and tell them where their gifts are going to their level of satisfaction, they will stop donating to you and cut off as a donor completely. So the game is changing here in terms of the demands of these younger generations, these newer generations, what they expect of institutions. And I think it's really going to push us to up level to meet those expectations or run the risk of losing them as donors. Gen X also being really at the peak of their careers or getting close to their careers may mean that they're also approaching prime giving years. So if you think of them turning 46 to 61, a lot of Gen Xers are VPs, directors, senior directors, or chief advancement officers, chief development officers, EDs. So this is the group that really is starting to make those strong giving decisions. But they're also really, I think, in a struggle as the sandwich generation, often caring for aging parents and their children. So I think that places a financial burden and definitely a time, energy, and attention burden. So in communicating with Gen X and I would say millennials, being sensitive to their time, short and frequent communications are going to be more successful than long, elaborate communications. Gen X is kind of that forgotten generation because they kind of sandwiched in between boomers and millennials, but they really are an incredible powerhouse in your giving diaspora. A few fast facts about Gen X. They are the leader in volunteer hours served annually across all generations. So one great way to engage Gen X is to get them involved as a board member or a committee member, because they are also the most likely generation to want to serve in those spaces. So those are really great ways to get them involved and to see firsthand what your organization is doing. Another really interesting fact, more than 60% of Gen Xers are willing to be peer-to-peer fundraisers and serve as advocates for your organization if they understand the impact, if it's a reasonable time commitment, and if you can help them see the motivation and real-world difference that their gifts and their friends' gifts are making. But that's another really great way to engage Gen X is through that peer-to-peer element. When we think about communication, I think there is kind of a perception that younger generations are disengaging. They only want to be on social or see text. Well, for both Gen X and millennials, more than 2/3 of them are subscribed to nonprofit email lists. So email, as well as other channels, of course, is an excellent way to continue engaging with these groups, sharing education, impact, cultivating them, telling them the great work that your organization is doing. And I think that, though, alone will not serve to engage them. It's having that multi-channel and omni-channel presence, with direct mail, email, text, social, up-to-date web content. There really is an expectation that all of those channels are working together cohesively to share your message. And lastly, Gen X is very digitally savvy. They are the second most likely generation after Gen Z to donate with a digital wallet. So when you think about that, think about streamlined online giving forms, releasing friction from the giving experience, and really trying to provide some of those PayPal, Apple Pay, Google Pay options in your online giving forms, because this is a way in which they do want to engage. So that's a snapshot of our Gen X friends. Let's focus on millennials. And you'll see some consistency between the two groups. I may say we, as an elder millennial, the millennial institution or group is incredibly digital and tech savvy. Internet came to my house when I was, I think, in middle school and high school. It was a huge part of my educational experience, but that's really when that tech space started to change. Millennials also are driven by, again, a deep sense of social responsibility and a desire for transparency, just like Gen X. Millennials are also inclined towards authentic causes that align with their personal values. And I'd like to give an example of what I mean by that. Millennials are less likely to give to an institution or an organization than something that is authentic to them. So for example, my brother and sister-in-law lived in Asheville during the hurricane season that really decimated the city of Asheville, and they also were affected. My husband and I, rather than choosing to give to the American Red Cross or some kind of national institution that would come in and do good, we researched and found a local food pantry in Asheville that was giving food to people who were displaced. So rather than $100 going into the big machine and we don't know where it's going, we found a specific foundation that could actually tell us that the dollars that we were giving went to food that went into people's mouths to make a difference. That is the shift that is happening. Less of that trust in institutions and that they're going to use your funds the way that is best, and more really wanting to see that one-to-one impact. So again, just like Gen X, millennials are motivated by impact and that real world tangible result of their contribution. And again, if you are not showing that to them, they will disengage and find someone else who will. Millennials are also most likely to be influenced by recommendations from friends and those in their networks. And if any of us have bought something on Amazon because it got 40,000 five-star reviews, I think you can start to see how this can be so powerful. Testimonials, not just from the organization, but from peer groups, is really what is going to start to influence these millennial donors. So a few fast facts about millennials. This one shocked me. 40% of millennials are enrolled in monthly giving. And I think that model makes sense when you start to think about Netflix and Amazon Prime, NPR, some of those subscription models where you set it and forget it. It is challenging to get your institution to be a part of that monthly giving space, but that is a really strong way to engage millennials. They're also highly engaged, I think there's no surprises here, in peer-to-peer fundraising, crowdfunding, social media, online giving. That's very much a part of their giving and online experience. Similar to Gen X, 60% of them are subscribed to nonprofit email lists, so a great way to keep engaged with them. And lastly, millennials really do expect an active online presence from nonprofits. And I think some of that goes to reputation and validation. So let's say I see an ad online for an institution. If I go to the website, I expect the information to be super up to date. And then if I start following them on socials, I want to get that continuous feed of positive real world impact from them. But if any one of those channels doesn't deliver, it gives me the sense that they're not using my money wisely, paying attention to their brand. So I think that expectation of a strong, active, and dynamic digital presence is one that nonprofits really need to sit up and pay attention to. So that's our breakdown of millennials and Gen X, hopefully giving a little bit of a good sense of that understanding of what really makes these donors tick. So I want to come back to this question of how prepared are you for the next generations of donors? Because they're really, in some cases, not the next generations, they are your current generations of donors. So at the beginning of the call, the folks on the call said 40% were somewhat prepared, 20% not very prepared, and 40% not prepared at all. And I will say you are in good company. And the reason why I say this is because of research that I'm actively doing with the Association for Healthcare Philanthropy right now through their Core Insights program. So back in February, we did a survey of healthcare organizations in North America. So this is specific to healthcare. We only had 92 respondents, but it was a good start. But this is the first time in the past decade that any research has been done with healthcare institutions about their preparedness for younger generations. And I talked about exactly these same topics with Gen X and Millennials. So I will just pop a teaser in here. The full report has not yet been released. It will be next month. But if you're interested in it, I'm able to send you a copy without it being gated. So feel free to reach out to me and I'd be happy to share the results with you. But fundamentally, as we asked these 92 respondents across the country of all different sizes of healthcare institutions, how prepared are you? A few key findings really came to light. First of all, prioritization does not equal readiness. So 66 of the institutions who responded said this is a priority, but only 4% of them felt very prepared. So very much a disconnect between understanding that this is important and frankly understanding how to start tackling it. Along those lines, 46% had no strategy in place for engaging Gen X or Millennials. 72% had no clear ownership of this work. So we asked the question, who on your team is responsible for engaging these younger generations? And nearly 3/4 had no one who had that clearly defined role and responsibility for strategic work and ideas around this concept. And lastly, 73% basically planned to delay action or didn't plan to act at all because they didn't have the resources, the capacity, the expertise, or that internal staff bandwidth to take it on. Which I think also leads us to some of the biggest barriers to engaging younger donors. And you may experience this as well in your institution. We asked, what really are those friction points to engaging younger donors? And you can see the top few are pretty strong. Competing priorities, this has not yet risen to the top, as we saw, limited staff capacity, and I think the real key here is lack of strategy and unclear ROI. And I hope by now, showing how some of these younger generations can easily become your mid-level donors, you start to see the ROI that's in place, not to mention the $84 trillion of great wealth transfer. But I think fundamentally, these factors show that there is good leadership understanding. We need some more data. Yes, we need some time and resources, but fundamentally, there's a lack of clarity about how to tackle this, how to engage those donors, and how to do that within your existing staff resources and capabilities. So that's where I'd love to go next. And this is really the last major section of this webinar is how to engage Gen X and Millennials. And I will say a lot of the research and ideas here is still very much emerging. Even recently on the Association for Healthcare Philanthropy member forum this week, someone asked, how do you engage these generations? And one person had an idea and 5 people wanted to know the answer. So I think there really is a lot of an emerging understanding of the best practices here. And that's where I'm so excited to be here with you today to share some of my ideas, but hopefully through the Q&A really invite some of your best practices and experiences as well. So let's start with some key themes. I think none of these will be surprises, but I like putting it all in one space because I think it gives strong strategic clarity for how we need to change the way in which we engage with Gen X and Millennials. Starting with leading with impact and relevance. General institutional language, your gift us gives the opportunity for us to invest in our communities. That's not going to cut it anymore. And I really like this example. This is actually from an e-newsletter that our team sent out earlier this week on behalf of a client in California, again for healthcare, but includes really specific examples about what fundraising can do. You can see here it's a cancer center wish list. We need these resources to help elevate the care. And with your support, we can check off those items. We need cold caps. We need tablets. We need an activity cart. And you'll see how there's a little icon in here to identify exactly what it is. And when you click through, there's the opportunity to give and donate to one of these specific resources or to add your dollars into that global pot. But I think fundamentally identifying exactly what is being expected and to give donors a sense of where their dollars go and how it's going to make an impact That is going to be the absolute expectation from every donor, I would say from here on out moving forward. Even better would be to identify the exact dollar amount needed for each of these items. $25 allows us to buy a cold cap. $50 allows us to stock an activity cart. And we've done some of that work as well. So fundamentally, that specific examples, not general language, providing that direct impact. Another key theme is highlighting storytelling and tying every appeal back to outcomes, hopefully showing data and metrics. And I really like this example from Charity Water. Charity Water is, I think, one of the best and most inspiring digital groups for how they're directly impacting philanthropy. But this was an email that I received on World Water Day. And what I loved about it is they included this dynamic message. They said, and I'll actually just read it. I'm on my other screen here. But today on World Water Day, we're raising a glass of clean water in your honor, to your compassion, your generosity, and the simple but powerful belief you carry that everyone everywhere deserves access to clean and safe water, like the $250 gift you made in 2024. And because of your choices, something extraordinary happens, and they start to give examples. They show visuals. They say thank you. There is not an ask. This is pure stewardship. And this is a really cute animated GIF on the bottom of 2 glasses of water clinking and cheers to each other. This made me sit up, take notice, because they knew me. They knew my gift history. And frankly, it's prompted me to remember I had not given to them last year. So by their records, I'm considered a lie bunt or even a sci bunt, and it actually inspired me to add them to my giving list. So I think some of that storytelling, giving examples, and tying in the data specific to your previous giving history is critical and certainly going to become an expectation moving forward, provided, of course, your data is accurate. A few other key themes to think about: communications reflecting agency, partnership, shared responsibility. We're in this together. We need you. You are our partner. And also, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, understanding these generations are really busy. We've talked about that sandwich generation, navigating children, aging parents, full-time careers. It's a lot to handle. So as you think about the way in which you communicate with Gen X and Millennials, keep your touch points short, frequent, and purposeful. No fluff, no extra words. If you have 4 stories in your newsletter, make it 3 or split that into multiple newsletters. One of each has 1 story. Keep it tight, because that is the attention span that we're dealing with, frankly, these days. And I think we all can experience that. You're all Gen X and Millennials on the call. I think you are feeling that day to day. Moving a little bit into engagement and fundraising, there's a lot of consistent themes coming through here. Again, Gen X and Millennials want to be engaged as a partner. They don't just want to be asked for money. They want a connection and a reason to give. So I think thinking of them as partners in the work that you're doing and not just a disposable transaction. I think if that mental shift starts to come through in the language of your appeals, that will be extremely powerful. Along those lines, interactions need to feel really authentic and impactful. And this is a great example I saw on LinkedIn that someone shared of a text of an email they received from an organization thanking them for the monthly gift that they had signed up to receive. And again, I'll read highlights of this, but I just thought this was brilliant. Every month, you make sure that first generation college students have the support they need. And because of you, our students know that they are not alone. So now here's an example of a student, Anaya, who moved into her graduate housing at Princeton. She was part of our first cohort. She was celebrated. Here's a quote. What stood out most wasn't the resources. It was knowing someone believed in me enough to stay. And that belief is why you give every month. And here's what your support has made so possible so far this year. And look at these great statistics they're putting in. You are the reason we celebrate. You are the steady presence. And from our entire team and every student whose lives you touch, thank you for being part of this mission. I'm getting goosebumps just reading this, and I've read it several times. What I love about this is the specificity, not only in giving these tangibles about what gifts can support, but referencing a student by name, where she lived, really starting to craft that narrative, that storytelling about who she is. I can picture her. I can picture her moving in. And the quote coming into place was absolutely critical. So think about this in thank you messaging, stewardship communications, an impact report, that personal, tangible, authentic experience. Like you're talking one-to-one with someone. We may be sending broad-based communications, but they should feel like you're talking to a neighbor or your mom or your uncle. We really need those communications to feel super impactful and authentic in order to cut through the noise. Other engagement opportunities with Gen X and Millennials are thinking kind of outside the box of the way in which you think about volunteer, committee, and other leadership activities. Make them virtual, make them flexible, make them brief or episodic. So for example, at my children's school, if I'm invited to join a committee, they're asking me for a 9-month commitment. I can't do a 9-month commitment, but I could do a 2-week commitment, or I could volunteer for a day. So I think thinking about just kind of changing the expectations of the way volunteerism and engagement, how that's expected, and really trying to meet people where they're at with that flexibility and virtual experience in some of those more unique ways that speak and kind of fit into the existing lifestyle of a donor. One other example that I will give, my uncle actually is really involved in Feed My Starving Children, which has large grocery packing facilities across the country. And I was talking with him and he asked the same question, how do we engage these younger donors? And I said, well, what's the volunteer commitment for packing a box? He said 90 minutes. I said, are you kidding? Well, how many times do you have it over the course of the day? Could I come on a Saturday morning? Sure. Could I come on a Friday after work? Absolutely. Is there a restaurant across the street where I could have my kids come with me and then take them out for dinner? Sure. So some of it is really building out that understanding of how someone can see themselves getting involved, but thinking that this was an after hours, 90-minute, easy to access opportunity with free parking in front, I'm sold. The last piece about key themes, peer-to-peer fundraising. Again, we've talked about this, those personal connections, personal testimonials, and really helping folks build relationships within the community. I think that's a really strong, somewhat time-intensive, but a good upfront investment in terms of setting those ambassadors so that they are going out into the community and engaging on your behalf. So let's pull all the pieces together. I have a few other ideas for engaging Gen X, Millennials, and Gen Z to share, a couple more tangible examples, some specific to higher ed because that's really where a lot of these are emerging, and some that hopefully are resonant with you. So I'll run through these and then we'll wrap up with some questions. One idea is the 10 under 10 award. Now, this would work really well for independent schools or higher education institutions, but maybe you have a cohort or a program that has graduated or volunteered. Collect nominations through an e-newsletter or social presence of young alumni or young constituents who are doing great things in the world, and then promote the heck out of that. Through social, you can honor them at events, really make those people on an annual basis, and then switch up those groups, feel really well celebrated. Digital giving, we've talked about a little bit. Make online giving frictionless. So think mobile wallets, the mobile experience, and recurring giving. I love this example from Charity Water. You've heard me talk about them already, but monthly giving, they're calling out with their spring water, which is their giving society. If I choose $40, it says it gives 12 people clean water every year. And that impact changes with every button that I click. So think about how to make this a really clean, easy, and impactful giving experience. Home events is another way to think about some of that volunteer engagement. Ask someone, a donor, or even a prospect, to host an event at their home for their age group. Think 10 people, 5 couples, 15 people max. And maybe it's a giving opportunity. Maybe it's just a chance to ask them questions, because you know the adage, if you ask questions, you get money. If you ask for money, you get questions. So I think there's a good opportunity here to invite those folks to be strong ambassadors, even if they're not on your highest level of donor, of the donor pyramid. They might give you those opportunities to connect with others. Leadership opportunities, we've talked about ways for donors to meaningfully be engaged and lead through volunteerism, mentoring, or boards. Social media, of course, I can't go through a presentation about younger generations without talking about it. Really work to build an outstanding, authentic, but I would also say sustainable social presence. Don't try to be everywhere. Pick a few places that you can maintain. Instagram, LinkedIn, and TikTok are big ones. And I do think LinkedIn is another really great and sometimes underutilized opportunity to connect with your most professional members by engaging with them and even promoting their highlights there. If they attended your institution or are part of your church and are doing great work within the space, this is a great way to feature them. A few final ideas: scaling down giving amounts. If you have a 1972 society like this group does, they also are providing $197 options and $97 giving options. So different lower level giving options for their younger alumni to try to make it a little bit more accessible, but still connect to the theme. If you're in a higher ed program, a senior giving program, start asking your existing seniors to contribute in a small way that feels meaningful to them or in honor of someone on their team. Ask your older alumni to match their gifts to make them feel like they're making an impact. But now you're building a culture of philanthropy with your existing students so that once they graduate and get into their careers, they feel that connection and impact. Along those lines, young alumni, for those of you with independent schools and higher education, it is much easier to start building a culture of philanthropy now while they're on campus than when they leave and they go off far afield. It's very difficult to restart that relationship. One other idea is to use new moments or peer connections to reach out to these donors kind of as an excuse to reboot the relationship. So let's say you have a new gift officer who came on board, a new executive director or a new head of school, a new priest who's at your institution. Have that person send a broad-based email to your donors, just engaging them, re-engaging them, and perhaps for your higher level lapsed donors, invite that opportunity to get to know them better. And lastly, mentoring and professional engagement are strong options to really connect older donors with younger donors and merge together not only that giving proclivity, but also deepening their engagement with your institution. So I will conclude before we open to questions. If you take any 3 words away from this presentation in terms of how can you best connect with Gen X and Millennials, it is to focus on educating them on all the great work that you do, expressing tremendous gratitude for their support of your institution, and sharing impact in every way that you possibly can. And if you can do those things while making your outreach feel as personal as possible, that is the best way that we can start to cut through the noise and really start to engage with these emerging generations. I promised you a reading list, and I won't go through this here, but these are in the slides that Megan will send to everyone. There is a ton of information in here, and if you have any other resources or research to share, please send it my way. I would absolutely love to see it. So I think we have about 9 minutes left. I'd love to invite any questions that emerged. And if this doesn't feel like the space to submit them, please don't hesitate to reach out to me through email, connect with me on LinkedIn, send me your questions and share your own ideas. As I'm gathering my own library of great content, I would love to feature anything that you have found to be really successful. So with that, Megan, I will turn it over to you for some Q&A.
Thanks, Beth, for that informative presentation. We will now open it up for questions. If you have a question for Beth, please type it into the Q&A box on your screen. We have a question here from Hannah. She asks, what is the recommended frequency for touch points for these generations, especially for email? How much is too much and how much is not enough?
So Hannah, that is a question I get often. And I'll give you kind of a, maybe not a cagey answer. The fundamental piece is to look at your engagement trends. Look at your open rate, click-through rate, bounces, and opt-outs specifically. If your opt-outs are tipping over 1%, you're emailing too frequently. If your engagement, your opens and clicks start to dip, you might be engaging or not giving good content. But in terms of frequency for email, it really depends on the organization. I would say if you're sending an educational e-newsletter, I would love to see that at least monthly. We do have some clients, though, who send it quarterly, every other month, or even twice a year, and still see that twice a year education email increase substantially their giving. So I would say, try to find a frequency that feels sustainable to you and provide that right amount of content so it's not overwhelming. But I will say, too, if I think about my own retail experience, Crate & Barrel emails me twice a day. That feels like too much. But I think we also need to understand that your donors want to know the impact that their dollars are going towards. So if there's an opportunity to share that on a weekly basis, if that is the frequency with which your institution can report out, amazing, as long as you're sustaining good engagement. But bottom line, I would say think about a weekly cadence based on a monthly cadence based on your organization, and then see how that feels and fits with you.
Yeah, I would say, as a millennial, if it also depends on the content of your email. If every email is just asking me for money, right, I might unsubscribe. But if it's a good story of the week and you're sharing impact every week and it's feel good news, then it might not be too much, right?
Yeah, I totally agree, Megan. And I think that's a really important element as well, is we don't just want to be asking and thinking. And that's why I think that education piece is so important. So if there is the time to ask and there is that opportunity to solicit, but sharing those feel good moments, last week and just reporting back on impact. Giving Tuesday, how many of you are sending an email after Giving Tuesday when you've had a really strong push saying, we did it. Because of you, we did this, and here's what the impact was a result of. So I think that really strong blend of solicitation, but lots of thanking, lots of gratitude, and lots of education is critical.
All right, our next question asks, when looking for examples of how annual dollars are used, where do you start? So kind of towards that $50 buys a tablet or $100 buys a cow. Where do you go to find these examples?
That is an excellent point. And I think it depends. I think it depends on the organization. So, we do a lot of work in healthcare and with schools, and oftentimes they'll go to the program themselves. So talk to the cancer department or oncology department about, how has philanthropy helped with dollars? How much do each of these pieces cost? So part of it, I think, is really going to the folks who are boots on the ground, buying the supplies, understanding the impact of that work. I will say and acknowledge it is challenging to find those tangible dollar amounts. We've had a lot of clients struggle with it. But I do feel like if you can maybe go to the source either of the people who are purchasing things specifically, the teams that are using them with donors, and or just kind of getting an understanding of if your institution is giving philanthropic dollars to a particular department, just really understanding how they're tangibly using that and doing your best to try to quantify it if you can. And I also will say a nice range works well. So you maybe have $25, $100, $500, $1,000. Maybe think about those brackets so folks can see themselves specifically in one of those ranges.
Yeah, in our religious organizations, we've seen good examples of case for support for like each parish within a diocese. This parish needs a new roof. It's going to be this much money, or this much money can support a retired priest for a year, or this much money can put a new priest through seminary and school. So they're out there. You just have to dig them up.
Dig, yes.
Hannah has another question. She says, what personalization in marketing pieces do you recommend or have you seen the best results with?
Personalization, I will caveat it that personalization only works if your data is clean. And if your data is not clean, then I would wait until your data is clean to start personalizing, because the worst thing you can do is say, hi, Megan, when you mean to talk to Teresa. So personalization, I would say a couple of different factors. Name obviously is critical, and you can explore that in subject lines. I like it in the body of copy as well. So, dear Beth, blah, 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 your impact. Beth, this is why I'm asking you to make a gift today. So I think there's opportunities there. Personalization of giving level or giving amount, we do it in direct mail all the time, but rarely is that included in emails. So I think that's a good opportunity. But even more so, especially for lapsed groups, we like to include, kind of like what Charity Water is, last gift date or last gift year and last gift amount. Because donors don't actually remember when they made their last gift. You do, they don't. We did a survey of donors a while ago, and the vast majority of lapsed donors who hadn't given in 3 years said, oh, next year I'm going to repeat my gift. So they didn't remember they hadn't given since 2022. So personalization factors, I think those are a couple ones. So gift date, gift amount, anything you're proposing that they give. If you have, for example, I'd love to invite you to increase your gift from $10 to $20. And I think other levels of personalization are the connection they have with your institution. So, for example, in higher ed, if they came from the College of Arts and Sciences versus the College of Business, speaking to them and leveraging content in that way specifically, those are a couple of ideas offhand of some personalization opportunities. I hope that answers your question, Hannah.
Yeah, and Katie submitted a question. while you were talking along the same lines, she says, do you think there's value in segmenting the language based on the age range and where they are in life? For example, she says, young alums are just starting their careers, 25 to 45 are mid-career and raising kids. Older folks are thinking about retirement. Do you reference that in the letter itself to address them where they're at?
Man, Katie, that is a great question. I will say that we have not yet done that. I am very intrigued by that as a concept. And that's exactly where my brain was going too, Katie, is if you think about where these folks are in their lives, are we segmenting by ask amounts, by the way we're engaging them, by length of copy? I'm honestly not sure yet. I don't have research to cite whether it works or doesn't. I think it would be a fantastic test. But as always, I think we have to be really careful. I should have said, I of course am stereotyping these generations. It feels silly to take 33 million donors and talk about how they all exist as an institution. And I want to make sure that we don't get into that trap as well of assuming that we're meeting people, we're assuming that they're at that stage of their life specifically. But I think there's a way to hint at it. Teresa, we know you're really busy, and I hope you'll take the 70 seconds it takes to read this because you truly can make a difference. I think there's ways that we can start to sort of weave that messaging in without stating explicitly, you might have aging parents at home and children who are going off to college, So I think it's trying to find that balance. So I do believe there's value in segmentation. Again, sustainable is where I would go. I don't think you want to create all these segments if you can't monitor it. But maybe choosing a specific campaign, a specific approach, or an opportunity for A/B testing would be a good place to start and see if you're seeing a change in the revenue at that stage.
Well, great questions, everyone. That's all the time we have for today. If you have more questions you didn't have a chance to ask, you can email Beth directly. Her email is up on the screen, or you can reach out to me at info@Suttle-Straus.com and I can connect with Beth and get back to you. Everyone should watch their email tomorrow for a link to this recorded presentation and a PDF copy of the slides so you can read up on some of those references Beth included. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate you being here. Thank you, Megan.
Thank you.